From Honolulu, hours before it was to take effect, President Donald Trump's revised travel ban was put on hold Wednesday by a federal judge in Hawaii who questioned the government's argument that the measure was motivated by national security concerns. U.S. District Judge Derek Watson also said Hawaii would suffer financially if the executive order blocks the flow of students and tourists to the state, and concluded that Hawaii is likely to succeed on a claim that the ban violates First Amendment protections against religious discrimination. The illogic of the government's contentions is palpable, Watson wrote. The notion that one can demonstrate animus toward any group of people only by targeting all of them at once is fundamentally flawed. Trump called the ruling an example of unprecedented judicial overreach and said his administration would appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to win. We're going to keep our citizens safe, the president said at a rally in Nashville. The danger is clear. The law is clear. The need for my executive order is clear. The judge issued his 43-page ruling less than 2 hours after hearing Hawaii's request for a temporary restraining order to stop the ban from being put into practice. The ruling came as opponents renewed their legal challenges across the country, asking judges in 3 states to block the executive order that targets people from 6 predominantly Muslim countries associated with terrorism. Federal courts in Maryland, Washington State, and Hawaii heard arguments Wednesday about whether the revised travel ban should be allowed to take effect early today as scheduled. In all, more than half a dozen states are trying to stop the ban. Watson made it clear that his decision applied nationwide, ruling that the ban could not be enforced at any U.S. borders or ports of entry or in the issuance of visas. Watson was nominated to the federal bench by President Barack Obama in 2012 and is the only native Hawaiian judge serving on the federal bench and the 4th in U.S. history. He received his law degree from Harvard in 1991. And attorneys told a federal judge that the measure still discriminates against Muslims. Government attorneys argued that the ban was revised substantially to address legal concerns, including the removal of an exemption for religious minorities from the affected countries. It doesn't say anything about religion. It doesn't draw any religion distinctions, said Jeffrey Wall, who argued for the Justice Department. Attorneys for the ACLU and other groups said Trump's statements on the campaign trail and statements from his advisors since he took office make clear that the intent of the ban is to ban Muslims. Trump policy advisor Stephen Miller said the revised order was designed to have the same basic policy outcome as the first. The new version of the ban details more of a national security rationale. It is narrower and eases some concerns about violating the due process rights of travelers. It applies only to new visas from Somalia, Iran, Syria, Sudan, Libya, and Yemen, and temporarily shuts down the U.S. refugee program. It does not apply to travelers who already have visas.
Thank you, Beverly. EPA takes hit, military boosted. President says budget will shrink bloated federal bureaucracy. From Washington. President Donald Trump has finalized his first budget for the federal government, a blueprint that would make deep cuts in the Environmental Protection Agency and other domestic programs, while significantly increasing spending on the military. The budget to be submitted to Congress on Thursday was widely expected to cause political pain for Republicans and Democrats, who will have the final say on spending in the arduous budget process. Trump has promised a spending plan that fulfills his campaign, promises to boost national security from spending more on defense to building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. Though he repeatedly promised that Mexico would pay for the wall, U.S. taxpayers will foot the bill. We are proposing a budget that will shrink the bloated federal bureaucracy, and I mean bloated, while protecting our national security, Trump told supporters at a campaign rally late Wednesday in Nashville, Tennessee. He boasted the expected increase for the military will be one of the single largest increases in defense spending history in this country. He also predicted that under his leadership, the armed forces will become bigger, better, stronger than ever before. Republicans have groused about some of the preliminary plans, including elimination of the $3 billion community development block grant program that is popular among local GOP officials. Turning the page on this computer, well, just a minute. Here we go. The U.S. Supreme Court. He also called his new travel ban a watered-down version of the first one, which he said he wished he could implement. We're going to win. We're going to keep our citizens safe, the president said at a rally in Nashville. The danger is clear. The law is clear. The need for my executive order is clear. The judge issued his 43-page ruling less than 2 hours after hearing Hawaii's request for a temporary restraining order to stop the ban from being put into practice. The hearing was one of the 3 held in federal courts around the country Wednesday. You know what I did? I think I didn't get quite down there. Anyway, Trump's plan to eliminate community development block grants was dismissed on Capitol Hill by those who remember how a modest cut to the program sank a spending bill not long ago. The U.S. spends more than $500 billion on defense, more than the next 7 countries combined. But Trump has signaled that he would make the Pentagon the big winner with a $54 billion boost to defense spending. Here's Beverly.
From Washington, House Republican leaders were retreating from their previous take-it-or-leave-it approach to health care legislation Wednesday night, prompting in no small part by expert analysis highlighting the proposal's negative effects, including the financial toll on older, low-income residents of rural areas. The GOP bill would have a substantial impact on places like Nebraska, with sparsely settled areas that have little health care competition and higher costs, analysts say. For older people, that could mean higher health insurance rates and fewer with coverage. Older people in Nebraska who are lower income would certainly be among the most affected in the country, said Cynthia Cox, Associate Director of Health Reform and Private Insurance at the Kaiser Family Foundation. Such an impact is one reason that the Republican health care bill is having trouble. Even as conservatives ramp up their opposition to the bill for being too similar to the current Affordable Care Act, moderate Republicans are threatening to peel away from their party's proposal because it could hurt too many of their constituents. Vice President Mike Pence visited Capitol Hill on Wednesday in an attempt to shore up support, but Speaker Paul Ryan emerged from a Republican meeting Wednesday evening, acknowledging that changes would have to be made to win passage. And senators have been wary of throwing their support behind the proposal. Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska has declined to offer an assessment before the House votes. We'll see what comes out and what comes over to the Senate, Fischer said. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa said he's been told by House leaders that they are looking at adjustments specifically for those ages 55 to 64. They are very cognizant of what they do in the House has to be done with the idea that they've got to get 51 votes in the U.S. Senate, he said. The bill went into last weekend with some momentum, having passed through 2 committees, including the House Ways and Means Committee. Representative Adrian Smith of Nebraska, who represents the state's sprawling and largely rural 3rd District, is on the panel. Smith was standing by his support for the legislation in an interview with the World Herald on Wednesday afternoon before the GOP conference. Asked about the studies showing a hit to the elderly in rural areas, Smith said lawmakers must be mindful of how legislation affects everyone. But he also said that it's important to understand that many Americans are being harmed right now by the Affordable Care Act, often known as Obamacare, and are asking for relief. He cited the case of one constituent who had lost her coverage 4 times under the law. He also said the Republican bill represents a first step and that additional measures can be expected down the road. The current priority, he said, is to scrap the current law. It's such a disaster now, we ought not to try to get too caught up with the fact that we're not going to do everything in one vote, he said. The nonpartisan bean counters at the Congressional Budget Office released their report Monday. Kaiser and other groups have done their own studies highlighting the impact on particular areas and states. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities published a report based on data available for the 39 states using the healthcare.gov enrollment platform, and found that Nebraska's marketplace consumers would see a $4,224 decline in the average tax credit in 2020. Only 4 other states would see bigger declines, according to the study. What's driving this is just that the underlying cost of care in Nebraska is much higher than in some other parts of the country, Cox said. The Congressional Budget Office noted that the GOP's bill's looser restrictions on insurance rates are likely to produce lower premiums for younger people and higher premiums for those who are older. At the same time, the Republican plan would shift from tax credits based on income, age, and the cost of insurance to those based solely on age, with the credits phased out for individuals who make more than $75,000 a year. The combined effect of those changes would hurt many older people. In 2026, for example, a 21-year-old who would pay an average estimated premium of $5,100 under the current law would see that drop to $3,900 under the GOP proposal, according to the initial CBO analysis. At an income level at $26,500, that 21-year-old also would receive a smaller tax credit than the current law would provide, but the net savings would be $250. In contrast, a 64-year-old would expect to see premiums rise from an average of $15,300 under the current law to $19,500 under the Republican proposal. Person has an income of $26,500, the tax credit would be dramatically smaller than under the current law, resulting in a financial net hit of about $13,000. The expected result of those changes? Older people would either ratchet down to a skimpier coverage plan with higher deductibles or do without insurance altogether. The CBO said that ultimately would help bring down overall premiums, as the pool of those covered by insurance would trend toward younger and healthier people. But it also would put a strain on providers because of uncompensated care, particularly in rural areas. Smith said he didn't want to be dismissive of CBO's work, but noted that the agency's analyses have been off at times in the past. He also said that the latest analysis does not take into account the power of having more options and innovations at the state level. Smith pointed to a stability fund included in the Republican plan intended to help states use high-risk pools and other tools to address uninsured and uncompensated care. He said the complaint from many people now is that insurers have bailed on the market, leaving little or no choice. That frustrates consumers, he said. That builds skepticism and does not ultimately solve the issue.
10:14 is the time. Trump to challenge fuel standards. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cold. From Ypsilanti, Michigan. President Donald Trump announced Wednesday that the administration will re-examine federal requirements governing the fuel efficiency of cars and trucks, moving forcefully against the Obama-era environmental regulations that Trump says are stifling economic growth. Trump revealed his plans during a speech at an automobile testing center near Detroit, where he also met with auto company executives and workers. The EPA under Obama had promulgated a rule for cars and trucks requiring a fleet-wide average of 36 miles per gallon in real-world driving by 2025. Trump's decision, while having no immediate effect, requires the EPA to determine no later than April of 2018 whether the 2022 to 2025 standards established are appropriate. If the EPA determines they are not appropriate, the agency will submit a new proposal next year. And briefly on global warming, reducing pollution and curbing overfishing won't prevent the severe bleaching that is killing coral at a catastrophic rate, according to a study of Australia's Great Barrier Reef. In the end, researchers say the only way to save the world's coral from heat-induced bleaching is with a war on global warming. And finally, Dakota Access. A judge refused to head off the imminent flow of oil in the disputed Dakota Access pipeline, likely clearing the way for operations to begin next week. Here's Beverly.
From Washington, if Donald Trump promised something on the campaign trail, chances are it will be in his first budget. Spending on the military and border security would increase dramatically. Programs combating global warming would be slashed, and $4.1 billion would be spent on a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border. Trump's first budget will be unveiled today. We wrote it using the president's own words, said Mick Mulvaney, director of the Office of Management and Budget. We went through his speeches, we talked to him, we wanted to know what his policies were, and we turned those policies into numbers. Trump will attempt to shrink the size of the federal government, eliminate redundant programs, make agencies more efficient, and get rid of waste, his aides say. In some cases, aides say, Trump will cut programs only to later create his own. For example, he plans to reduce money for some infrastructure projects at the Department of Transportation in the budget, but unveil his own package later in the year. The spending proposal for the 2018 fiscal year, which begins on October 1st, includes a $54 billion increase in defense spending. The document is merely a blueprint. A more detailed document will be released in May.
Thank you, Beverly. Let's see. U.S. charges 4 Russians in Yahoo breach from Washington. 2 Russian intelligence agents and a pair of hired hackers have been charged in a devastating criminal breach at Yahoo that affected at least 500 million user accounts, the U.S. Justice Department said Wednesday, in bringing the first case of its kind against current Russian government officials. In a scheme that prosecutors say blended intelligence gathering with old-fashioned financial greed, the 4 men targeted the email accounts of Russian and U.S. government officials, Russian journalists, and employees of financial services and other private businesses, U.S. officials said, using in some cases a technique known as spear phishing, it's spelled P-H-I-S-H, phishing, to dupe Yahoo users into thinking they were receiving legitimate emails. The hackers broke into at least 500 million accounts in search of personal information and financial data, such as gift card and credit card numbers, prosecutors said. We will not allow individuals, groups, nations, states, or a combination of them to compromise the privacy of our citizens, the economic interests of our companies, or the security of our country, said Acting Assistant Attorney General Mary McCord, the head of the Justice Department's National Security Division. The case, announced amid continued U.S. intelligence agency skepticism of their Russian counterparts, comes as U.S. authorities investigate Russian interference through hacking in the 2016 presidential election. Officials said those investigations are separate. Here's Beverly.
We're going to move now to our local and legislative news. U.S. Labor Department officials have opened an investigation into the trenching company that was involved in Tuesday's trench collapse that trapped a worker for about 6.5 hours. Utility Trenching, which has operated in Omaha for 15 years and has 4 previous OSHA violations, will be investigated by officials with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Violations can result in fines up to $160,000 apiece, although actual fines tend to be substantially lower. An employee of the Utility Trenching declined to comment Wednesday. Drew Johnson, 23, became stuck knee-deep in soil in a roughly 12-foot deep trench about 9:45 a.m. Tuesday outside a home at 13019 Hawthorne Court. One side of the trench had collapsed on his legs. About 30 Omaha firefighters responded and used equipment from Metropolitan Utilities District to loosen the soil and free Johnson. He was taken to Nebraska Medical Center with foot pain and was listed in fair condition Wednesday. His mother, Joan Johnson, asked an acquaintance, Wendy Keeler, to release a statement Wednesday. Andrew is resting in ICU, the statement said, adding, the family appreciates your respect for their privacy at this time. Joan Johnson also thanked workers for the lengthy effort to rescue her son. Joan wants to thank all the fire and rescue personnel who stepped up to save her son, and she understands the time involved in his rescue was due to the danger of compartment syndrome, which is damaging pressure on tissue, and further trench collapse, the statement said. The time involved in his rescue was very reasonable. Rescue staff was only concerned with Drew's health and welfare, along with their own safety. Scott Allen, an OSHA spokesman, said the department will work quickly to investigate the incident. He said it must be finished in 6 months. These types of incidents are completely preventable, Allen said. It's the responsibility of the company doing the work to ensure they have the proper shoring or trench boxes to protect the worker from cave-ins. The company's previous 4 violations have occurred over the past 9 years, adding up to $7,850 in fines. OSHA found 3 serious violations in 2008, 2 citing excavation violations, and a 3rd citing general protective systems. OSHA fined the company $750 for each of the 3 violations. The 2 trenching protocols that were violated involved having a safe exit in excavations that are more than 4 feet deep and having daily inspections to look for conditions that could lead to cave-ins. The company then had 1 repeat violation in 2012 that had to do with a regulation requiring a safe exit from the trench, a stairway, ladder, ramp, or other means. Trenching work is considered a hazardous operation because cave-ins can be fatal. 2 methods, sloping soil on each side or putting a protective box or shield to protect an employee, are the most common ways to prevent cave-ins, according to an OSHA safety publication.
From the Journal Star, snow geese turn heads. Show a picture, and thousands and thousands of these snow geese. Snow geese gather on Stagecoach Lake near